They'll blanket you in Wi-Fi and profit off the radiation. Congregation collecting the people for that Satan. I keeps it blazing, cause I can read between the lines. I ain't blind, we unwind what they're really saying. Genetically modify what you're tasting. Don't need that college promise, so now you live up in your mom's basement. Redesign time so your mind is always wasted. Programmed to crave the basics. Keep the beta in stasis. Pay the state, kid. You're in debt for being born. Messengers are mourn, just the price for being warned. Don't be alarmed, disconnect from their machinations. Stop subscribing to the folly of own nations. Bone breaking ain't the answer, cause they seek the ownership of souls. Spread the seeds and watch them grow. Break the chains of control. Break the chains of control.
Sweet, eternal balance of all that is good, true, and beautiful, friends. Rogueways is honored to bring to you today someone who never stops fighting for all of us, even as he has faced his own hell and come out the other side, a warrior. A health champion bringing us life-changing nutritional supplements to keep us charging down our paths, a man who reminds us always to act in our free and sovereign interests, and a father who has paid the ultimate sacrifice for his family and still fights on to this day. David Stephan, it is an immense honor to have you here tonight, and thank you so much for sharing with us and for all that you do.
Well, thank you so much for having me on, Lindsay. I sure appreciate it, and I appreciate what you're doing and sharing the truth out there and the difference it makes in people's lives, awakening them, right? So thank you.
That's very cool. Thank you. And I just have to give a shout out to Sasha right now because she's in the chat and she's actually the one who recommended you. And I'm really glad that she showed up here tonight because I don't know if anyone knew that you were coming tonight. I've had trouble scheduling things and announcing them and whatever. So awesome, Sasha, that you're here and that you get to see this because you made it happen. And before we get started, I do like to invite people to go to rogueways.org and find all kinds of things there that might be helpful for them. We've got Organite energy pendants that can help you. There's art and poetry and books that I write. And there's also tarot readings and guidance sessions for you if you are interested and you have a spiritual need or just something that you need to connect with deeper and figure out, then I've got your back. So go check it out. And please do subscribe at subscribestar.com/rogue-ways to keep the show going. I really appreciate all my subscribers out there. Thank you guys so much. David, I always like to start the show with a pointless question of the episode. And the pointless question I was going to ask you is what your favorite element is.
What my favorite element?
Yes. And you could take
as in,
that.
Like on the periodic table of elements?
Well, I was going to say, once I wrote the question, I was like, do I mean the periodic table of elements or do I mean like the sort of 4 or 5 elements, depending on how you look at it? So you can take it however you want to.
Ooh,
yeah.
Wow. That's a tough one for me because being in, if we're looking at the periodic table of elements, being in the nutritional world for about 2 decades now, we take a very holistic approach to nutrient supplementation. And so in relation to that, there isn't really a favorite one because, one without the other is really nothing. They all work synergistically. So
very good point.
At this point in time, probably standalone iodine.
Ooh.
Iodine would probably be my favorite element.
Wow. Why iodine? Why iodine?
Well, it's just because people are so incredibly deficient in it comparatively to almost every other element out there. Don't get me wrong. I mean, there's massive deficiencies in most of the nutrients out there, the various minerals like magnesium and whatnot. But with iodine, it's such an incredible deficiency that when we even use iodine by itself, without the various companion nutrients like selenium and magnesium and vitamin C and B2, B3. When we use iodine by itself, it has incredible life-changing effects even by itself. Though I don't recommend just using it on its own. If you want to see the full effect, you got to use the companion nutrients with it.
Wow. And they just work together and maximize the effects of one another, and that's the best reason to do that.
Absolutely. Yeah, you optimize the iodine pathway when you have the other minerals and vitamins available as well. And that seems to be about every pathway in the body. It's not dependent on one vitamin or mineral or amino acid. When you use all of them in proper balance in conjunction with each other, that's when we see incredible life transformation take place.
Wow, that's so powerful. It's so funny that like these little simple things that are actually everywhere on Earth, it seems like they're pretty abundant just in nature, and yet we're so deficient in them. And so if we just give ourselves those things that are everywhere, then we can see all these transformations. And it's so fascinating to me that that's true. And why do you think it is that even though these things are everywhere, that we end up deficient in them?
Well, I that's actually what I did for a living for quite some time until the media kiboshed my ability to be able to go and present at various health shows across Canada. But that's what I used to do on almost a weekly basis. I was at various health shows or at health food stores doing educational seminars.
Cool.
But the reason being, if we take a look at the root cause, it starts with our poor agricultural practices,
Mm.
where we have not reinvested into the soil. And so that's what we saw back in the 1800s into the early 1900s was a massive depletion in the mineral content found in the soils.
Mm.
But then compounding the issue when we introduced in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, when it started to take off, when we started to use more synthetic herbicides and pesticides and fungicides, and then in 1974 with the introduction of glyphosate, what it did is that it prevented the small amount of minerals that were available in the soil still. It prevented them from being uptaken into the plants. So even though we had approximately 50% of the mineral content in the soil, it wasn't available to the plants. So what that translated to was that by about the late 90s, the deficiency in the mineral content in the food was typically around about 80% deficient from what it was in 1947.
Wow.
And so in 1947 was already bad enough as it was. We were
Yeah.
already seeing massive rise of disease. It had already been identified in the Senate in 1936 that there was a rise in disease due to nutrient deficiencies. So it's really a compound issue. One, we've stripped the soils, and two, we've prevented the soil from being a living organism with its own ecosystem within there, with all the bacteria cultures and the fungi and all that. We've sterilized it and prevented those minerals from breaking down and converting to an organic format that the plants can readily uptake. And then, as a result, we're eating nutrient deficient food.
It's just like matter that we're just shoving into our body for no reason almost. It's like barely helping
Almost,
us.
yeah. We get the caloric value, and there's no doubt about that with the major issues with obesity.
Yeah.
We're getting the caloric value and an over intake of caloric value, but that's because our body says we need more nutrients. We're starving, even though we're overeating.
Yeah, that makes so much sense to me that there's a reason why a lot of us are overeating and just eating for, like it seems like almost no reason. And because there's still something that our body is missing. And so we have that hunger. And I wonder if we had the right nutrient balance, like you're talking about, and we're taking it even through supplements, which I think are, and you probably agree, like secondary to food. But like you said, we're not really able to get it from food. So we kind of have to be doing this. But if we did that if we'd all see that we have less of those cravings and hunger feeling and like we're not satiated ever.
Absolutely. And the long-term solution is to reintroduce life and nutrients back to the soil.
Yeah.
And not put these different chemical agents in there that absolutely decimate it. They're equally as harmful to the plants and the soil as they are to us.
Yeah.
And so if we can correct that, then our food will become our medicine again. But right now, our food on a large scale is not, even if you're eating organic, it's still not as nutrient dense as it should be. But at least you're eating clean.
Yeah.
So it's a good choice, but the best choice is ultimately to start growing your own food if you can, and make sure you know what you're doing to the soil and reintroduce those microbes back into the soil, as well as the mineral content that's been stripped.
That's a great point. And I really, I started my garden this year and I've got a lot of squash. Squash is really easy to grow. And I got a little bit of tomatoes and some radish and just some various different things. But I really can tell that I feel like I need to next year focus more on the soil health rather than just when to plant and how, because I'm a beginner. I don't really know what I'm doing, but plant at this time and water it this much and all of these things. I think I've got that kind of down now and established, but I want to bring back some soil health and really focus on that and make my own compost and use that. But also there's, I don't know if you're familiar with Phoenix Aurelius, but he has he does a lot of alchemic and spagyric creations, and he makes a soil solution that I think you'd probably really like it if you don't know about it already, or if you don't already use something similar. And anyone out there listening who's like, how can I make my soil healthier? He does have an option there. And not to be too self-serving, but if you are going to go to Phoenix Aurelius's lab and buy things, use the affiliate link below this video, and then use the Going Rogue 15% off site-wide coupon that you can get a huge discount on that, because I think that those soil improving things are a little bit pricey, but it sounds like it's very worth it. It's going to pay you back in what you're going to get out of it and what you're going to consume, and and literally like create your body with.
Absolutely, because even if you introduce a mineral content back to the soil, if you don't have the various microbes, the fungi and the bacteria and whatnot
Yeah.
to actually process those minerals, it won't be uptaken to the plants. And it's the same thing we've seen over the last about 24 years in relation to mineral supplementation. Is if you just give somebody rock form minerals, which is what most minerals are coming in, they're not chelated. If they're not turned into an organic compound, your body won't absorb them and you won't see the benefit from it. And so the same thing applies to the soil nutrition as well as plant nutrition. Is you have to have all of the various ingredients in the soil to facilitate the breakdown of the minerals and the uptake of the minerals into the plant. So it's extremely important that
Yeah.
you use different soil conditioning agents that restore that life.
And it's almost like nature had it all figured out before we messed it up.
It sure did. It sure did. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
But man in his infinite wisdom went and changed everything, and now we're reaping the rewards, and they're not so nice.
Yeah. Yeah, really. It's nice though that there are people like you who are working to bring us back to that understanding and that place where we can really feed ourselves actually and truly, and use supplements wisely and get our health back to normal, because that's I feel like there's a lot of people who are getting that hint and getting that message and kind of going that route. And as horrible as this year has been in so many ways, I feel like it's kind of pushed people towards that same thing where it's like, well, we got to start to, take care of ourselves and make sure we have what we need. And so let's start a garden and let's have chickens and whatever else we might need in order to get back to that. So there's a little silver lining, at least, on some of the chaos there.
There sure is. I mean, for some people, it's been absolutely devastating, unfortunately. But for
Right.
others, it's really created a sense of awakening,
Right.
an urgency almost, if you want to put it that way, or a motivation or drive to begin to get back to our roots and flourish that way. And that's so important, because
Yeah.
that's such a rewarding lifestyle. There's been so many people that have reached out to me that, they want to move out of the cities. They want to live off the land. And really, this whole COVID-19 hoax has really pushed people in that direction. So it's been a beautiful thing for some people who have had the wherewithal and the understanding, but for others who are so attached to their way of life, to the system, it's been absolutely paradigm shattering for them.
Yes.
And it's been devastating in so many ways. In fact, in our business of mineral supplementation, we really focus on the mental health aspect. And sadly, our business has really flourished because of it, because this whole COVID-19 thing. So from a business standpoint, yeah, we could look at it and say, oh, this is great news. But when we see all of a sudden a major demand on mental health supplements, that's not a good thing. That
No.
shows that there's something wrong with society right now. And so the COVID-19 hoax has really served to decimate certain people's lives. And unfortunately, suicide has gone through the roof as a result of it.
Yeah, it's really, really, and it's one of those. I think people in this community kind of understand that, but in general, it seems like it's being ignored. This huge surge, like you said, in suicides and mental health issues that are coming up, and I just hope that, because I know also in our community there can be some like disdain for like the sheep or the normies, and really a lot of, especially when there's these divisions over like wearing masks, and there's this a lot of aggravation around that, and so it's easier to just like lash out at people and fight people. But I think when we notice these things, that this mental health crises are increasing, that suicide's increasing, that no matter who it is and how they're experiencing this, people really need compassion right now, like desperately. And so if you're available to give that right now, then it's the time to do so, because it is desperately needed. And so, yeah, it is that double-edged sword where it's like, oh, it's really good that all these people are waking up, but waking up is really hard to do. It's like a very difficult process. And so we can have compassion for that.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's generally a lot of anger associated with the waking up process. People generally wake up grumpy in real life. Well, the
Right.
same thing happens when people wake up to the situation at hand,
Yes.
to how, wake up to what's going on with the matrix. And generally they wake up a little bit groggy and a little bit angry at first, until they get their head wrapped around it, because, they feel betrayed or lied to their entire life. And in essence, they really were. But at the end of the day, it's a beautiful process if they can get through it without succumbing to that anger, which really is rooted in fear.
Right. Yeah, and getting rid of that fear is a beautiful thing. So it is
Mm-hmm.
same double-edged sword. It's hard to watch people go through, but you're also like, yeah, go for it.
Mm-hmm.
That's cool. So your supplements can actually help people deal if they are out there listening and they feel like they need help with maybe depression or anxiety or something else. Then you actually have something that can help them through that.
That's correct. Yeah, I wasn't meaning to put a plug in or anything like that.
Right, but I mean, it's helpful.
We got on the topic.
Yeah.
And so actually in Canada, this is the product that we use. I don't know how well you can see. It's probably a little bit too glossy, but it's Empower Plus. It's the same product in the United States as well, but just a different label, different bottle. So it'll look a little bit different if people are searching it out. But it's True Hope is the name of the company, truehope.com. Yeah, well, that's part of the story. The backstory as to how we got to where we are today in fighting the government on multiple fronts. It really, True Hope was the catalyst that created such a disdain for us with the Crown prosecution here in Canada that they would then engage in heinous acts of cover up to try to get myself and my wife in jail. But that's a whole nother kind of backstory or story in itself that I guess we'll probably get into.
Yeah.
But yes, so yes, indeed they do help with anxiety and depression and stress and all that. And in fact, after the first study surfaced in October of 2000, showing that our supplement was over 3 times more effective than antidepressants were.
Wow.
Immediately, Health Canada came in and tried to shut us down here in Canada and prevent this supplement from being available to the Canadian public. And at that point, there was about 3,000 Canadians who were relying on it that had come off their psychiatric medications. And sadly, talking on the topic of suicide, Health Canada knew that they were going to create a crisis because of their actions by preventing Canadians from having it. They were warned by Ron Lejeunesse, who at the time was the head of the Canadian Mental Health Association's Alberta chapter. They were warned that suicides were going to occur if Health Canada continued on with their actions. They knew that they were creating a crisis. It's in their own paperwork from FOIP requests that we received. And they continued on. And unfortunately, when we finally ended up in the courts with them a few years later, it was testified by Ron Lejeunesse that he knew personally of 2 suicides that had taken place, but he surely didn't know all 3,000 Canadians that were on the product relying on it. And so we don't know how many people suicided from Health Canada's actions, but here they're supposed to be looking out for our health, supposedly.
Right.
And yet they're causing death.
Yes, and clearly the motivation is not to help people, or else they wouldn't look at a study that proves that people are being helped and turn around and try to stop the exact thing that is proven to help them. Clearly there's some other motivation going on.
Oh, clearly. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And so that was one of the large catalysts to how we got to where we are today. But the backstory it goes back a little further in relation to my family. My father really being a stand-up individual in fighting for our rights. And that goes back to the late 90s. But that was really kind of the icing on the cake for putting us all on or having us flagged and the government coming after us relentlessly for now 2 decades.
Wow. So your father started, how did he start? What did he do to start this all off?
Well, the story actually, if we were to go back really far, it actually kind of starts with my grandfather, who ended up committing suicide 5 years before I was born.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So back in the late 70s, he took his own life, and it was due to mental illness running in the family. And so my mother fell in his footsteps, or followed in his footsteps. And after 10 years of suffering with bipolar disorder, she went to the doctor to get help. And so this was in January of 1994. She goes to the doctor. She receives a prescription for Prozac, which was supposed to be one of these new blockbuster SSRI medications that was supposed to change the face of mental illness. She jumps on the medication, and within 2 weeks, she took her own life.
Wow.
Now,
I'm so sorry.
And at first everybody's confused about it, right? My father is, not knowing why she took her own life, doesn't understand the effects of Prozac. It's not until about a decade later that we, now working at that point in time, came across the evidence that was suppressed that the pharmaceutical industry had, showing that Prozac and other SSRI medications on average will increase your risk of suicide by 2 times.
Yeah.
Now, Prozac is even worse though.
Whoa.
Prozac in some instances will increase your risk of suicide depending on the circumstances by 8 to 12 times. And so in relation to that, it's no wonder now, looking back at it, that within 2 weeks of getting on this medication that was supposed to help her, she took her own life.
Yeah.
And so it really kind of began with that. But my mom and my dad had 9 children together. And so the vast majority of us were exhibiting symptoms of severe mental illness. And so there was 2 of my siblings that had it extremely bad. My sister was in her early 20s, married, and had a 3-year-old son. And she was in and out of the psych wards at the time. And when she wasn't in the psych ward, she had to be on 24-hour supervision because she would obsess about ways to kill herself and her 3-year-old son, thinking that was appropriate and even necessary.
Wow.
She was on a cocktail of 5 medications, Haldol, Rivotril, Ativan, Cogentin, and Risperidol. And at best, she was sedated. At best, she was sedated from those medications, and she'd still go into bouts of psychosis. And so my father is looking at this and seeing the effects that it's having, that these medications are having on my sister. At times, she's in a wheelchair due to MS symptoms because of the side effects of medications.
Wow.
My brother, my older brother at the time, he's on lithium, a high dose of lithium, and he's still raging, and everybody's fearing for their life. He's stockpiling weapons, and so he's basically the next schoolyard shooting waiting to happen.
Yeah.
And so my father began looking down other roads, and he actually exhausted everything that was available to him within the medical system, within allopathic medicine.
Yeah.
And couldn't find any answers. In fact, at one point, a top psychiatrist in Calgary, Alberta, just said, you need to face the reality that someday you may have to plan for more funerals. These disorders are recurrent and they don't go away with time. They, in fact, often get worse. And so that's when he began looking elsewhere. And the reason why it's called True Hope was he ended up, after realizing that there was, at the time, no known answers for mental illness, whether in the natural health industry or within allopathic medicine, he ended up just turning to God and spending a lot of time fasting and praying, seeking for some kind of divine intervention that would provide restoration for his family. And nothing miraculous happened overnight, but it was interesting because he just diligently did this. I mean, he was watching his family fall apart before his eyes. He saw his father-in-law, what took place with him, and then his wife of 22 years, and now he's watching his 9 children fall apart, and his family's literally just crumbling before his eyes. And so he just diligently, over a period of a number of months, just continued to pray and to fast and to seek for an answer. And it was interesting how it came about. One day he's walking down the hallway of a large building that he was a property manager over. He was a property manager and engineer for 26 large buildings in southern Alberta. And he's walking down the hallway one day talking to his one of his colleagues about replacing carpets. And he's just overcome with this impression that he needs to just tell him what's going on at home.
Wow.
And so my father, as unprofessional as it was, just breaks down, starts crying, and says what's going on and how if something doesn't happen, he's going to have to get my older brother into the psych ward, and that there's no hope for them in essence. And his colleague had something interesting to say. He said, Tony, I don't have any mental illness in my family or anything, so I can't relate to you that way. But he says, I spent over 20 years in the animal feed industry formulating feed for hogs across Western Canada and the Western United States. And he says, we saw something commonplace in the hog pens called ear and tail biting syndrome, where the hogs would get irritable and they begin to actually bite chunks of their ears and tails off each other.
Huh.
So basically a psychotic behavior,
Yeah.
a hyper-aggressive behavior, hyper-irritable behavior. And he says, we learned in the animal feed industry that you could completely eradicate that disorder simply by putting the proper nutrients into their feed.
Wow.
So here in agriculture, they'd already discovered the cure to mental illness in animals, and yet it hadn't translated into human nutrition at that point. So the 2 of them teamed up together. They went and got a bunch of different nutrients from health food stores, and nothing worked. It took them 3 months to find a cocktail of different supplements that did work. and it was expensive, it was complicated. And so eventually the two of them teamed up and formulated an all-in-one supplement, and developed a proprietary process to put those minerals in such a way that your body could actually assimilate them.
Yeah.
And it was phenomenal, the results. And then by October of 2000, the first study was coming out, which, Health Canada came in, tried to shut down all other studies and any access to the supplements. And then researchers in the US found out about what it was doing. And so they started studying it, and they were replicating the same results, but 3 times more effective than antidepressants. And it just started to spread like wildfire. So even with government opposition, the grassroots movement had taken on a life of its own, and it just propelled. And so as a result, in 2005, we ended up in the courts with Health Canada, where they had charged my father and were trying to get him to basically shut down. And we won the court case based on the vast amount of evidence that came forward, as well as it was exposed that Health Canada was, in fact, knowingly putting Canadians in harm's way to the point of death.
I mean, they're literally saying they care more about pigs than people, which I'm all for, caring about pigs and making them happy and giving them the nutrition they need, but even more so with people. And that's crazy that they would go after that. But like we said, there's other motivations behind that have nothing to do with our health, and clearly, and we can get into that. But I want to go back to you said nothing miraculous happened, but it sounds to me like something miraculous happened, because I know it probably was not in your dad's like DNA, so to speak, to just sort of break down to this person all of a sudden. And it sounds pretty random. And I just feel like those are the types of things that like we follow our intuition, like that's where we end up, the things happen that need to happen because we trust in whatever that process, as crazy as it might feel in the moment or as weird as it might seem. If you follow that, I think you end up exactly where you're supposed to be. So that's a beautiful thing to hear, and a good reminder for anybody listening that's a part of the process, I think. So that's really cool. Yeah. And so then you're at this point where I'm guessing your siblings all gained, from this as well, and had a lot of results from that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So what took place right off the bat is when the initial concoction of supplements, because it wasn't an all-in-one supplement, that it wasn't even a business model or anything. In fact, how it became a business was out of necessity, because some of the products that my father was relying on for our siblings, and at that point in time, there was numerous people in the town that were also relying on it. One of the products was shoddy, depending on the batch. Some batches were good, some weren't, and so you never knew what you were going to get. And so when the first study began, it had to get shut down initially because they were getting mixed results depending on what batch they were using of the supplements. So out of necessity, to ensure that people were getting well and for the progression of science, an all-in-one supplement was developed. But when that first concoction came out, within 5 days, my brother had completely come off the lithium.
Wow.
And he said it was like a fog lifted.
Wow.
He can now see what was right and wrong. So here he's walking around and he's engaging all these destructive behaviors, and he doesn't even recognize it.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
And so this gives us a sense of compassion now for those that have mental illness, which is really just a nutrient deficiency disorder. Yeah. It's not an actual mental illness. It's just you're starving for nutrition. Go and fast for 2 days, or find yourself out in the wilderness with a lack of food and see how well you feel. Right? You're going to be very irritable with those around you. And you could even get very aggressive. And so that's really what people are experiencing on a daily basis. Yeah. And they don't even recognize what they're doing. And so within 5 days, my brother says, like a fog lifted. Within 30 days, he was back to within what you'd consider, I guess, the normal range of having good days and bad days, that he would have no longer received a diagnosis for bipolar. And here, this was an individual that was extremely troubled, and that was concerning to his doctors and to his family. 2 months later, my sister, who is working with a specialist out of Edmonton, that's one of the top psychiatrists there, she wasn't willing to listen to my dad initially when my dad phoned her up all excited saying, "We've got an answer." So she just ignored it and said, "Whatever, Dad." Right? Probably thought that he was, off his rocker. And anyways, within 2 months, she had finally gotten onto the supplements and got off her cocktail of 5 medications. It took her 45 days because of how addictive they are.
Yeah.
In many instances, more addictive than crack cocaine.
God.
And so she came off the 5 medications, got well, and no longer required 24-hour supervision. went back to living a normal life, doing what she wanted to do, taking on little business projects. Ended up writing a book actually called A
Wow.
Promise of Hope. It used to be available in stores like Costco and Chapters. It's now available on audible.com and as well as Amazon.
How cool.
Though I'm not a big fan of supporting Amazon,
Right.
especially at this given time, but
Absolutely.
that's where her book is available, called A Promise of Hope. And it, she's just gone on to be a successful individual, whereas before, like I said, at best she was sedated, basically drooling in a wheelchair, or she was in the psych ward because of the risk that she was to herself and her 3-year-old son.
Wow.
So it absolutely just revolutionized our family. It just completely changed everybody's lives. I mean, especially coming out of the trauma after the suicide of our mom.
Right.
It just really helped us get through that in a healthy way where we could actually deal with it appropriately, and then get on to living lives the way that we wanted to.
Wow, it's such a beautiful thing. What a story of miraculous healing and hope. I really love it. And it's definitely a testament as well to the product, which again, neither of us came into this trying to sell a product, but I just think that it's great that you have that available for anyone listening who might have family members or friends, or they themselves are suffering with something, to understand that nutrition can help them, and that your product can also help them. I think that's a beautiful thing. And I have experience with sort of something that like sounds and looks like mental illness, and then actually nutrition has healed it, and that's Hashimoto's. And when I describe to people my symptoms of Hashimoto's, they're like, "Oh, well, you're just really depressed. Like that just sounds like depression." And I'm like, "It does look a lot like depression with a lot of the symptoms of it that it has." And then, it turns out that eating a certain way and getting the right supplements and selenium and these things is, I feel 100% better, and I have none of those symptoms. So I can totally understand how these things, and also like you said, how you can be in it and not even really realize like how bad it's getting, because you're so like fogged up and you're so disconnected, and it's all just sort of garbled, and you just kind of like slump through it, and it's really, really difficult to even like see that it's happening and then to like take steps to correct. It's kind of terrifying, in fact. And so especially if you know someone who's suffering, I think it's good to like reach out to people and maybe offer them these solutions, because you can get stuck in it pretty easy.
You sure can. And especially if you don't even really recognize the problem in the first place,
Right.
and then you begin to project on everyone else, thinking that everyone else has the problem. And it's a vicious cycle. I mean, we've been now dealing with this for since 1996, really is when we first began. And we actually established a support program to help people come off psychiatric medications while get cross tapering onto the nutrition, because some of them are extremely addictive, and you jump off of them and you find yourself curled up in a ball in the corner or in your closet type thing. And it can be actually quite dangerous as well.
Yeah.
So we've developed a support program to help people come off the medications. And since 1996, we've helped, it's probably getting close to 250,000, literally,
Wow.
people across the world. Thanks to Discovery Health, back in the day when there was good journalism and truthful material found on the TV.
Yeah.
Discovery Health Channel actually did a full-length documentary on us back in 2002, and they pushed it into 50 different countries. They translated it into different languages.
Wow.
And so all of a sudden we were a bit of a overnight hit, even though in the midst of it, we were fighting Health Canada and using all the money that we'd normally put towards marketing. We were using it towards just making sure that we could even be around due to legal costs, right?
God.
And so we've helped a lot of people, and it's been a beautiful thing. But we've had to help so many people just kind of get a grasp on reality over the years, where when they wake up, when they take the supplements, and all of a sudden their mind becomes clear, they have a hard time coping with all of the damage that they've done in the past without recognizing it.
Yeah.
And so it's one of those things where we've almost engaged in counseling services as well, on top of what we do with helping people come off the psychiatric medications.
That's so awesome that you recognize that need and are providing it, though, because that is not something I necessarily would have thought of. That's a really heavy weight for someone to carry and then have lifted.
Well, it was all out of necessity. And really it was, going back to the name True Hope, the reason I called it that, or felt impressed to call it that, was because, it wasn't because of him. He was merely just a vessel. It wasn't because of his business partner. He was just merely answering the call in a sense. But really it was, whatever you want to call it, the higher power, God, my father says, he's a firm believer in Jesus Christ. So he named it after, the one true hope in a sense, which is God, which is our creator.
That's awesome.
And so, having that responsibility now, where much is given, much is required.
Right.
And our family was given a second chance, really, where we had no chance. We had no hope of living a normal life. We were decimated as a family. And so we were given a chance that we never had. And so we look at it as it's our duty now to provide that same blessing for others as well.
Yes. Thank you so much for doing that. That's awesome. Well, and I want to talk about this, what they've done to you and what you've had to deal with. And, you said that you can no longer even present or lecture around the country like you used to do. And so they've shut that down as well. I mean, what has happened and how has it gone?
Well, that's a bit of a long story, but I'll sum it up in Cole's notes. And then if you want any more details, feel free to dive into any aspect of it. But finally, about the time that we were overcoming all of our Health Canada issues, which was a decade-long battle in and out of the courts, cost our company over $1 million over that period of time. Something else took place, something tragic, where my wife and I, at the time, we had 2 children, 1 4-year-old son and a 1.5-year-old son, both healthy, both home birth, no vaccinations. We were engaging in homeschooling. So, we're kind of going against the grain right off the bat, right?
Right.
Living an organic, holistic lifestyle, but really, attentive, just really investing into our children, knowing that what we input now will manifest later on in good fruits, in a sense, right? We're really, so we're really diligent in taking care of them. But something happened where, at a 1.5 years old in March, actually it's just late February 2012, my 1.5 years son came down with what appeared to be the croup. And for the first night, he ended up with a fever and a barky cough, which really kind of identified it as croup. But then after that, it just seemed like common cold type thing. And he overcame it within 5 days, like you would expect. And then he resumed normal activities. But then the next week, he starts to get tired. And it looks like he's kind of coming down with the flu, but there's nothing alarming. There's nothing, like, it's speculative at this point, because we're saying, well, it looks like he's coming down with the flu, but we're giving him, a lot of nutritional products like we normally do anyways, but we're giving him, some additional things. And so he must just be fighting it off. So, it's low-lying symptoms of the flu, but he's just not his normal self, rambunctious, whatever. Right.
Yeah.
And so this kind of persists on and off for a few days, but then by the next weekend, so now we're looking at almost 2 weeks from the time that he first came down with the croup, he seems to be just overcoming whatever he had. Well, at this time, we're fighting another battle, as my family is accustomed to. There was some legislation that we discovered was on the books that we would say would be basically the martial law bill here in Alberta. And what happened is, there was a bill put through all the municipalities wherein if there's emergency declared, the municipalities have the right to suspend all of your rights. Right. And everybody at the time saying they're not going to use it. It's not an issue. Well,
they're not going to use it. They're just going to create it. Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Tell us today. Right. Because they actually enacted a lot of it, but they still, we've seen nothing yet, because what's written to the bill, they can remove a lot more rights. The only thing that's not written in there is their ability to remove your right to life. But everything else is gone. They can put you in labor camps. They can conscript you. They can do whatever they want with you, with your property, with your family. It doesn't. There's no bounds. They can do all of it under an emergency.
Under an
they
emergency.
Can use whatever.
Including a fake emergency that has no evidence that it exists.
Well, and that's what we were claiming back then. We said this could be a perceived terrorist attack, and they could remove all your rights.
Right.
And so we were fighting this bill. And so towards the end of that weekend, I'm preparing to present at a county council meeting that we set up for the purposes of having this bill removed. And so Monday rolls around, and I slept in my spare bedroom that night. So that when I woke up early in the morning, I wasn't disturbing anybody. And I headed off to the meeting and presented, and about 300 angry people showed up to it. They had to move us into a mechanic shop in the county council building because they didn't have room for us in the normal county council chambers. So there were so many of us that standing room only, media was there. It was really bad for the county councilors that they finally decided, yeah, we're going to turf this bylaw that the province of Alberta rammed through us, right?
Good.
And so we had it removed. I show up at home at about noon, all excited about the success. And my wife at the time, she's 4.5 months pregnant. She's disgruntled with me because when I'm not on a business trip, which I'd just gotten off on the Thursday previous, I'm busy preparing for other stuff. So she's getting a little frustrated with me at this point, and she's sleep deprived because Ezekiel, my 1.5-year-old son, had a bad night the night before. So he kind of reverted back to the way he was about 4 days previous, which was nothing of concern really. But she's just getting frustrated because now it's, she's left on her own and all this type of stuff.
Yeah.
And so we have a discussion, and she says, should we take him to the doctor? Should we not? What? And I said, well, I don't see any reason to take him to the doctor. Like, there's nothing of significance here. There's no fever. There's no puking. There's no vomiting. There's no runny nose even. There's none of these telltale signs of really being sick. He's just a little more tired than normal. And yeah, he got a little agitated throughout the night that night. And so she's like, okay, well, I'm going to have my midwife come over because this week already, she has to do a wellness checkup on me and just see how everything is with the pregnancy. So I'm going to have her come over early just to see. And this midwife at the time was a practicing nurse as well. And for the previous 9 years, she'd been in the emergency room. So she comes out and takes a look at him, checks his vitals, all that type of stuff, and everything comes back normal. Yeah. Nothing of concern at all. Like nothing, no breathing issues, no noise in the lungs, indicative of an infection. Blood pressure is fine. All of his vitals are fine. And so, unfortunately, though, she had encountered a case of meningitis about 2 weeks previous. And so it was fresh on her mind. So she said, maybe you want to look into this because there has been a case recently. And so that became the basis for a massive cover-up. Because what would take place from there is that night we started them on electrolytes based on the recommendation of this midwife. And he had a good sleep that night. The next day, he seems to be fine. He's getting better. And he had a bit of muscle stiffness that looked like the achiness that you would get from the flu, like just the way you posture yourself and stuff. Right. And so that all went away, and he started to get more of his energy back and more playful. And he ended up waking me up from a nap, playing with my lip, doing a little that type of thing. And so he's starting to become his normal self again. And so we're thinking, tomorrow he's going to be back to normal. He's going to be up and running and back to his normal self. Well, that night though, so he goes probably about 5, 6, 7 hours without any symptoms at all at this point. And we're thinking this is great. He's just, now he's just going to rest. And, because of the previous night before that, he had, bad sleep. So now, he's going to wake up tomorrow and be fine. Well, he wakes up from his nap with what we now identify as Cheyne-Stokes breathing, which is a crescendo of breathing where they'll breathe a light breath, a normal breath, a heavy breath, medium breath, light breath, slight pause. And now, as parents, we're educated on this. Most parents wouldn't recognize what that is.
No.
What that is your system shutting down.
Wow.
And it can happen from a number of things. And so it can happen from meningitis, but that's when the pressure gets so intense in the brain cavity that it compresses the brainstem, which is in control of all of your vitals. Now, there's a lot of pain associated with that, and anybody in their right mind would be
screaming,
crying.
Yeah.
They would be showing signs of discomfort at minimum. And Ezekiel wasn't crying, and he knew how to cry.
Yeah.
He would let you know when he was uncomfortable. In fact, when he woke up with his Cheyne-Stokes breathing, he still seemed, at first, he seemed fully cognizant, and he even drank fluids. And so he's got no telltale signs of being in pain, but he's starting to shut down. And we had no idea. And so we're like, this is nothing like the croup that he had before. Do we take him to the hospital? What do we do? And before we had a chance to fully assess it, he went into complete respiratory arrest or paralysis. Just stopped breathing. And so I got on the phone with 911. I ran down. We're out in the country. We love to live in the rural area here, kind of starting up an organic farm and all that. And so I ran down the driveway. I get him the rural address at the time because I didn't know it off by heart. I'd only been there for about 3 months. And I get back in the house and he's breathing again. And he'd coughed up some mucus and fluid after my wife gave him a rescue breath and patted on his back. And he's breathing again. We're thinking, oh my goodness, like we just phoned 911 for no reason. Maybe he aspirated something and now he's fine again, because he seemed fine, 10 minutes before. And then he just kind of had these breathing issues. And we thought maybe there's something in his airway or what. And then that validated it, that, oh, there must have been something in his airway because now he's breathing.
Right.
So like, well, we're going to take him into the hospital anyways, just to be proactive on the matter. So we woke up our 4-year-old son. We started driving to the hospital, and he stops breathing again about a mile down the road. And so we phoned 911 again, and they dispatched the wrong ambulance. There was an ambulance within 3 minutes of us while we were on the phone. In fact, we ended up passing about 100 yards away from it 3 minutes into our call.
Oh my God.
And so if they dispatched that ambulance, it would have been like immediate intervention.
Right.
Instead, they dispatch an ambulance that is about, I would say in miles, about 25 miles away. And so we're heading down the highway, and we end up getting real close to the town where they dispatched the ambulance from, and we meet the ambulance on the road. And the ambulance takes him from us. And what we didn't know at the time is that the ambulance was now state run. It was province run. It had been taken over by the province about a year previous by an overriding government branch called Alberta Health Services that was now managing all of the ambulances in the province. And what happened is during the takeover, they removed different equipment from the ambulance that they didn't feel was necessary. But the paramedics felt it was necessary and had been requesting it now for about a year, saying we need this equipment in the ambulance. And what it was the equipment necessary for a toddler if they needed an airway. So our 1.5-year-old son gets in this ambulance, needs an airway, had been receiving CPR from my wife, mouth to mouth, and chest compressions for 11 minutes previous, gets into the ambulance, and they don't have any of the equipment necessary. And so he goes without any oxygen whatsoever for 8.5 to 12 minutes. We're not exactly sure what it was. It was at minimum 8.5 minutes based on some of the evidence, up to 12 minutes, depending if you're going to rely on other evidence. So he gets into the hospital, and they do a blood gas reading on him, and they discover that he has elevated potassium, hyperkalemia. Now, when you end up with elevated potassium, it will shut down your respiratory system as well as put you into cardiac arrest. It just shuts all the electrical systems down in the body, right? Because of the sodium potassium balance there. And so they found exactly what the culprit was, and it was potassium overload. How he got it, we still don't know to this day, because they covered it up for years, and we didn't discover it until 7 years after his passing, that this was actually what had taken place. We didn't have the medical evidence provided to us that showed in fact what had happened, and would explain everything as to why suddenly he just shut down without any other symptoms at all. And so we end up in the hospital. They end up transporting him to Alberta Children's Hospital to get better care. During transport, they discovered the problem with the elevated potassium. They treated him for it, and he woke up.
Wow.
Here he was completely non-responsive, had gone 8.5 to 12 minutes without any oxygen. They're basically thinking he's dead.
Right.
They treat him for the actual issue. Suddenly he starts to breathe on his own. They have to reduce his heart medication down to 1/4 of what it was within minutes, because all of a sudden everything starts to work on its own again.
Wow.
And so they're concerned that he's going to pull his breathing tube out. So then they administer a paralytic medication to him to basically shut him down. The problem is the paralytic medication is contraindicated for electrolyte imbalances, and that it can create cardiac arrest.
Oh my God.
They give him the paralytic medication, and immediately everything just goes right down rock bottom. The last note that we have is a blood pressure of 30/20. And then all of a sudden we have a blackout of evidence for over an hour.
Whoa.
No medical evidence. We just end up in this black hole. We don't know what took place during that time. It's absolutely illegal for them not to be documenting. At this point in time, we have the Cardston, Alberta emergency team rendezvousing with Lethbridge at the rendezvous point where Calgary's team is going to meet them there. And so we have 3 teams joining together, and yet they claim there was nobody to take medical notes during that time. Yet we have medical evidence that relies on medical evidence that was created during that time, and yet the medical evidence isn't there. So it's an absolute lie. Something took place during that hour that ultimately finished our son off. And the next thing we know, he's in transport to Alberta Children's Hospital, and for some reason, we see 3 more consecutive doses of this rocuronium bromide being administered, this paralytic medication, and nobody can make sense of it. I've consulted with an anesthesiologist saying, is there any reason that you'd ever give this medication 3 consecutive doses within 31 minutes to a child?
Yeah.
And this is an anesthesiologist that uses it, as he says, all the time. And he just sat there dumbfounded and shaking his head, trying to figure out why they would ever do that. And he couldn't come up with a reason. He says, that doesn't make sense. That would take place because it has a half-life of 45 minutes. And the doses themselves were already too big for a child who's 10 kilograms. Giving an 11 milligram dose to a child on a hypothermic protocol where most of the blood is congregated in the core, so it's concentrating the medications, plus he's got an electrolyte imbalance, it just didn't make sense. So he gets into Alberta Children's Hospital, where they determine that there's no evidence of an infection and no evidence of bacterial meningitis. So they rule it out. So they're looking for an alternate cause. Meanwhile, they're telling my wife and I that it's bacterial meningitis. And yet there's evidence behind the scenes where they're trying to find a different cause as to why he ended up arresting.
And they already had the answer.
Well, they had the answer, but the problem is that the answer that they had would hold the state agency fully liable because it's an easily treatable answer. Had they had an airway for my son, had they been able to get an airway, he would have went 11 minutes with CPR, which is less than ideal oxygen, but still oxygen nonetheless. They would have got him into the hospital. They would have found that he had a potassium overload. They would have corrected it. He would have woken up. They would have probably kept him for a night or 2 just to monitor him. And then he would have been back home with no long-term issues. No long-term issues. And so it fully would have put the Alberta Health Services on the chopping block, in a sense, for engaging in criminal negligence, knowing that they needed that equipment being worn by their paramedics, not doing anything about it, criminal negligence resulting in death. And so they had to come up with a cover story to throw the blame on us as parents versus accepting the blame and apologizing and paying us. They protect themselves. It would have been a max payout of $82,500. That's what they've maxed out. If they cause somebody to die, the max that you can get from them after suing them is $82,500. So it would have been a very small thing that would have never brought him back. It wouldn't have done anything. It actually would have been more of an insult than anything after they cause his death. So they come up with a cover story, but then they also realize that they can try to kill a lot of birds with one stone. One, I'm the face of the Canadian retail division for True Hope, and I'm going and I'm educating different stores. We're competing with the bottom line of the pharmaceutical industry. We're doing them serious damage. We're pulling people off of psychiatric medications left, right, and center while we're getting them well. And so 1, they could try to take me down. 2, my family and I are political activists. We just, the day before his passing, had this bylaw turfed, and we were saying that we're going to now take this to the provincial level. So we were already being discussed within the Alberta legislature, which would be like the state legislature, right?
Right.
And so we're already a topic of discussion within the government chambers. And so there's that element, as well as now they can create this agenda, and they're already starting to say, if it's bacterial meningitis, it would have been vaccine preventable.
Oh,
is what they're already coming up with.
There's another additional.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so here they're going to move forward with that. Now, what's interesting is we find this in the documentation when the Alberta Children's Hospital, one particular doctor out of there, phoned the police on us, phoned the homicide unit, actually. Just absolutely crazy. what she was telling the police is that the exact dialogue. If it's bacterial meningitis, it'd be vaccine preventable. Now, what's interesting is that 5 days later, when Ezekiel's pulled off of life support and ends up not coming back, and he ends up in the autopsy room, that evidence, that documentation is given to the medical examiner, but the documentation that says that he didn't have bacterial meningitis, that they could find no evidence of it in the CT scan, and that there's no evidence of an infection, that evidence wasn't given to him. Out of over 600 pages of medical evidence, he received 100 cherry-picked documents to help him so that he could hold himself not liable and say, this is the evidence I was supplied with. So if the fact that I came up with the cause of death being bacterial meningitis, where we used non-clinical research methodologies to determine that, in other words, non-scientifically approved methods to determine that, yes, he had bacterial meningitis, and that it was vaccine preventable, he can hold himself and say, I'm not to blame. This was the evidence I was given, right? And so sure enough, an autopsy comes out 7 months later. 7 months later it takes, because we ordered it. We wanted closure. We want to know what took place with our son, why he passed away. Nothing made sense. Nothing the doctors said were making sense. They were constantly changing their story day by day. We couldn't make heads and tails of anything. And so we wanted to know why he died. So we were anticipating that the autopsy report would explain it.
Yeah.
And when it came out 7 months later saying it was vaccine preventable bacterial meningitis, my initial response was of great concern, saying, I'm a logical person, and I don't read autopsy reports. It's not something that I'm interested in doing. But when I look at something like that, I have to question the relevancy of why it would be put into an autopsy report that it was vaccine preventable.
Right.
And the only thing I could deduce was that they were going to use it in a court battle against us. So I thought they were going to come and charge us.
Yeah.
And this is in November of 2012. Well, November passes by, December passes by, January passes by, no charges. I'm like, oh, okay, I was just being paranoid. Good, whatever, right? Sure enough, mid-February 2013, the police pull my wife and I in, and they charge us with failing to provide the necessaries of life, which is a charge that holds a penalty up to 5 years in jail. And so we're thinking, oh my goodness, like, they're going to try to throw us in jail over this and rip our family apart, and Child and Family Services is going to come in and they're going to remove, at the time now we've got our 5-year-old son, and now we have almost a year-old son at the point in time. And we're thinking they're going to come and remove both of our other kids.
Yeah.
Fortunately, they never did.
Thank
In
God.
fact, Child Protective Services says, we want nothing to do with this. They washed their hands of it and just walked away.
Wow. That's cool.
It's rare is
Yeah.
what it is. It's very rare.
That's really, really excellent luck.
So we end up in the courts and we're asking for full disclosure, and they weren't expecting that we were going to show up in the courts. And because I had previously been experimenting with the whole sovereign citizen movement.
Yeah.
And I won a court case for not having a license, registration, insurance, all that type of stuff.
Nice job.
I won a court. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. And I did that in 2010. Now, the interesting thing is, once we got all the disclosure, they were banking on me pulling that card, because at that time, there was trainings going on where they were saying these sovereign citizens are akin to domestic terrorists.
Of course.
So they were looking for the perfect case. And this was a perfect case because in the public, the optics of it would be to the public, look at what these radicals are doing. They killed their son, and now they just won this court case by using these legal loopholes, right? And they were anticipating that they were going to make it a national campaign. It actually said right in the disclosure, they were banking on this going national in the media. Wow. They were going to use us for that purpose to basically try to destroy the public perception of the company I'm involved in, the individual that I am, and who I was affiliating myself with in relation to this movement of sovereign citizens, or people just being, God-fearing individuals, recognizing their rights as creations of God, and not being servants to, some man-created system.
Yeah.
Exactly. Whatever this is. Yeah. Whatever this monstrosity is. And so the gut feeling that I had was, don't do it.
Yeah.
Don't pull the free man card. Go play the game. I didn't know why, and logically it didn't make sense. But in essence, what they let into their system was a Trojan horse,
Nice.
because they didn't know what they were bringing in, and they were banking on us doing that, of playing the sovereign citizen card, and never getting to the bottom of the whole cover up to expose how corrupt the system is.
Wow, I love that. I love so much when their shit falls apart against them. It's like they thought they had you in this perfect box. They were going to hit, like you said, like 8 different birds at once. They had it all planned out, and you just like snuck that fire in and burned them down.
Exactly. And no credit to me. I was just going by intuition.
That's
They
yes.
they thought they were playing, checkers, and it turns out that all of a sudden it became a game of chess.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden they had to shift their game plan, and they did. They've changed their game plan so many times. It's almost sent us spinning. But I think it's been in reaction to the fact that every one of their agendas has been dismantled time and time and time again.
Good sign.
And so at first we went to get the disclosure, and they didn't have it available. Because they weren't anticipating that we were ever going to seek for disclosure, because they thought we were just going to pull the eject hatch and say, you guys have no jurisdiction, go stick it.
Yeah.
So then we started to get trickles of disclosure, and found out, wait, there's more disclosure that's missing. Oh, there's more. And as we went and dived deeper into it, we started to discover that there's either destroyed or withheld disclosure to the tune of probably hundreds of pages, and we still don't have it.
Wow.
And so they're hiding a tremendous amount because it's so damning to them, but they never anticipated that we would go down that road.
Oh, I love imagining them just sitting there like, oh, we've got this, it's all perfect, and then being like, oh shit, what's happening? Like, this is not what we planned at all. That's so awesome.
No, not at all. And praise God, hallelujah, for real.
Hallelujah.
Like, it's just been, I've just been a vessel, and as I've walked in obedience to Him, that I feel the intuition and whatnot, then it's just come as it's come.
Yes.
So what happens is, in 2014, we have our first real court hearings, and we discovered that they're going to go vaccine agenda on this, and that they were going to use this to set a precedent in Canada that if you didn't vaccinate as a parent, if you didn't vaccinate your children, you could be held criminally liable if something happened to your child that they deemed to be vaccine preventable. And they were going to use us as the first case of its kind.
Yeah.
So we went and hired Dr. Tetiana Obekanic and Dr. Tony Bark, rest her soul. Beautiful women. They're just wonderful, just servants, just helping humanity in so many ways. And so we went and hired both of them, and they came up with a defense that absolutely annihilated the Crown's objective. And I was really looking forward to getting into court over the matter, because it would have actually had the opposite effect. It would have prevented them from ever having a precedent in Canada, because not only was it shown that the vaccine they said would prevent his death, which was the HIB vaccine, HIB, Haemophilus influenza type B, that not only was it not safe, that in the VAERS database, which is highly underreported, that there was thousands of deaths associated with the vaccine itself.
Exactly.
And that it wasn't even effective, that children that were getting this vaccine were still dying from Haemophilus influenza type B infections.
So it's killing them, and they're still getting the thing that it's trying to prevent against, which is killing them.
Exactly. So
ridiculous.
Children are dying from the vaccine, and they're dying from the infection the vaccine's supposed to be preventing. And so they ended up actually completely going away from that whole vaccine argument and dropped that agenda. So we thought, well, why aren't they dropping the case? Well, they then shifted it to the biggest anti-naturalopathy case in Canada. And the Crown-owned media, being CBC, ended up just doing smear articles for months on naturopathy. And our names were known by every naturopath across Canada, because their licenses were coming under question, whether or not they should be government licensed to be able to operate, because somebody could die from using naturopathy rather than allopathic medicine.
Even though allopathic medicine kills so many people all of the time. And that's proven.
Right. Let's delve into the statistics there.
Yeah.
Right. Just from what's being reported, over 300. Sorry, no. That's Medical Misadventure. Over 100,000 deaths in the U.S. and over 10,000 deaths, because we have 1/10 the population in Canada, over 10,000 deaths in Canada alone. So just from what is being accurately reported, which is underreported, we have over 100,000 deaths per year in North America from properly prescribed pharmaceuticals.
That's just prescriptions alone. We're not even talking about like
Yes,
surgical or other sort of interventions.
exactly. Because then we're
Wow.
getting up to about 500,000 if we combine the two per year. And yet they're saying you have to use that, otherwise you're endangering your child's life.
Yeah.
Wait a minute, look at the stats. With those stats, me knowingly bringing my child in to you is endangering my child. I should be
Right.
charged for failing to provide the necessaries of life by doing that as a first line option.
I'm like, I don't even know if I was like bleeding out if I would go to the hospital. I think I'd just like tie it off and like sew it up. Like I'm at this point, I'm so mistrustful of that system that I just don't want to ever go there for any reason.
It's an unfortunate reality that they've created here, where parents are put in between a rock and a hard place, especially with the advent of our court case, where they're scared that they say, I want to take my child in so I don't get charged like you.
Yeah.
But now looking at all the stats and everything that's come out, I'm concerned if I take my child in, one, harm will befall them, and if it doesn't, two, that they're going to do a cover-up smear job on us, and that we're going to be charged like you. So you have this major, conflict taking place in parents' lives right now, where they're like, we don't want anything to do with it, but we do, but we don't, right? We don't know what's the right decision because we're kind of damned if we do, damned if we don't.
Right. I mean, I wish that we could just go, if I want to say go back, but I don't know if we ever had this, but that we could just have people who were like what a doctor is supposed to be, in my mind, someone very knowledgeable who can suggest things that you can try given certain, what seems to be going on. And you always know that in life, nothing's 100%. There's always a chance that that wasn't the right thing and things go awry and people, come and go and that's life. But at least you can have these people you can trust to advise you. But there's no obligation to follow their advice. There's no, judgment if things aren't perfect and someone passes away, or you know what I mean? Like, I just feel like that's much more rational. Like that's just life.
Yeah.
But instead we have all of this, whatever this is again.
Monopolized medicine, which is weird, or medical mafia, really. It's interesting when you take a look at it and just look at it, from a logical standpoint. If I went to a homeopath or a naturopath and they made recommendations, I said, I really don't feel like, following that. And they're like, well, I'm going to phone, for let's say I'm bringing my child in, and they say, well, I'm going to phone Child Protective Services. Everybody would shake their head and say, what the heck?
Yeah.
Who gives them the right to do that? Right? Like, you as a parent get to make the choice. And yet here we've got this medical mafia, monopolized medicine, where only one segment of medicine has now legal authority to rip your family to shreds and to medically kidnap your children.
Yeah.
It makes no sense at all. But yet we've been conditioned as a whole society that somehow that's okay.
Yeah.
And it's not.
It's the church
at
of
all.
the
It
white
doesn't
lab
make any
coat.
sense.
Yeah. No, it doesn't make any sense. It's like so many things, though. If you bring up very calmly bring up some of these rational points to people and you suggest like, hey, if you look into this, it's actually kind of crazy. Like that conditioning sort of triggers this response that's like insane. Like I've done this with certain people, especially some of my family are nurses. And I've said things like, hey, what would happen, you think, if we don't just immediately cut the umbilical cord and, we let it like chill for a second, and they like freaking lost it. They were like, that's insane. Like they got angry instantly, emotional attack. And I was like, wow, I wasn't even saying I'm ever gonna. I was just asking like, what do you think might happen? And it was, so that's just this, it's deeply, deeply rooted in us. And it's clearly very emotional if you are trained in that profession. But I think even if you're not, we have that trained into us. And it is hard. It's hard to even get rational about it or to have discussions about it and question it.
Yep. Yeah, it's just really weird. We've been so brainwashed. Really, is the only term that sums it up. Is we have been brainwashed in government indoctrination camps that we call school for education, right?
And TV's reinforce it, radio's reinforce it, all these images that we see over and over again, and ideas that we hear over and over again, and to the point where if you do question it, people are like, you're crazy. And I'm like, is it crazy to suggest that if you are suffering from a disease, you think about your nutrition? Because even if that's not the thing that you think is going to cure you, can't you admit to yourself that it's going to help a lot? That if you just eat really well, and we know that nutrition matters, and why would that be so shocking? But even that, people are like, nope, I'm going to go inject chemo or whatever instead, Okay, I guess that's what you're going to do. But I also think, like you're saying, you know, and like has come up a couple times in the show of you have these intuitions and you trust in them, and that's actually this very powerful force in our lives. I think we're very detached from that. And I think if people were very honest with themselves and very serious about it, and they sat with it long enough and felt the answer, I think that they would also see the same thing. Like, oh yeah, like of course nutrition is important. And of course, you know, some of these things make a lot of sense, but we're also cut off from that intuition and that connection that we have to, you know, our soul or our spirit or God or whatever you want to call those things. But that side of ourselves is very repressed in this society that we've created.
Absolutely. And once again, rooted in fear.
Yeah.
You cannot, this one thing I've learned is you cannot tap into that intuition the way that you should if you are in a state of fear. They don't exist on the same plane. Different you know, if we go energetic perspective, it's two different wavelengths, frequencies. You can't be in both places at once.
Yeah.
So we need to learn to surrender and just trust. And that's what we lack. And especially if we're tuned into the TV, that's why they perpetuate continually this fear, this anger, this fear, because it keeps us in a place where we can't really feel what the truth is, where we can't get into that place where intuition begins to guide us and free us, really, where we become liberated through it. You can't find liberty in fear. It just doesn't happen.
Right. And like you said, that's such a good point that you can't really tap into that when you have all of this garbage coming into your eyes and your ears and into your mind. And it is program of fear. And speaking of that, do you, we'll just jump to sort of a deep end here question here. Do you feel like all of that is very intentional? Like that this is, you know, because you can look at your story and you can say, well, these people are just kind of greedy, or they're idiots, or they're, you know, looking out for themselves, or all of these things? Or do you think that it's sort of like this is actually the plan and there's an intention behind it and they're headed somewhere and it's all connected in that way? You know, where do you land on that question?
Well, I think when you boil it right down to the people pulling the levers at the top, it's intentional. I think you've got the people in the middle there that are just doing their jobs and thinking that they're doing what's right. Some of the doctors, I mean, they're all involved in a cover up one way or another, but I think some of them have honestly convinced themselves, that they're making the right choice, that some, you know, out of ignorance, saying that my son did have bacterial meningitis. What was of interest is in 2016, when we finally got around to the trial, they called a massive amount of doctors. In fact, it was precedent setting in Canada as to the amount of expert witnesses that were allowed on. And it's now, our case is now cited to, you know, basically try to destroy other parents now in Canada with how many expert witnesses can be tendered against the defense. And so they brought all these doctors on, and they all had varying opinions as to what took place. They didn't even actually have their stories all straight, which was interesting. What was of interest is, I'll jump forward. Oops, sorry.
Oh no.
We lost everything. Okay, so what was of interest, sorry, you probably can't hear me that well.
No, we can hear.
Give me a second here. We went down in a ball of flames.
Yes. Well, they're just like brute force attacking it. They're like, if we get all these doctors in, no matter what they say, they'll at the very least, like, I'm guessing this is a jury trial, right? So they'll at least, just the sheer repetition of some alternate scenario will like sort of cow everybody into just saying like, okay, I guess. I mean, 72 people said A, B, or C, and nobody said D, so it's not D. You know,
in essence, what it is, it's reverse oath helping is really what it's considered.
Reverse oath helping.
Yeah. See, back in the past, and it's been deemed illegal in the past, what would happen in trials is that they would get as many witnesses as they could against, you know, one party or the other, and it's called oath helping, and it obviously results in prejudicing the defense or whoever is doesn't have the greater number of witnesses.
Yeah.
And so basically, if you're having a jury trial or it's a judge alone, what happens is everything is tainted based on the vast amount of witnesses that are being tendered against one party. And so it's been deemed illegal. But in this instance, being that we're the defense, it's considered to be reverse oath helping. wherein now you have all these witnesses saying the same thing. So the jury has to say, yeah, surely it has to be true, right? So now you've got basically 2 against, 5, 6 doctors. And we trust doctors already because, well, they speak with a sense of authority. And these are just parents. What do they know?
Right.
And all 5 are saying the same thing. But all 5 weren't saying the same thing. So what happened is it came out in the first trial that our son didn't have bacterial meningitis. And we discovered that about halfway through the trial. And so now the jury is left with this evidence at the end where they realize, wait a minute, this isn't what we've been told it was for the first 3 weeks of the trial by all of these doctors. We've got credible evidence here that shows that there's no scientific basis for what all these doctors are running their mouths on. And so what happened is the judge actually then he erred in law. I think intentionally. He was probably being told to do because, like I said, there was levers being pulled really high up. This was the first case of its kind in Canada. They were relying on it to set a precedent here in Canada that now it's not just about negligence, because we weren't found to be negligent in any way, shape, or form. In fact, it was quite the opposite.
Good.
But that choice of care, if you chose naturopathy over allopathic medicine, you could be held criminally liable. So this was about monopolizing the pharmaceutical industry on a criminal level.
Yeah.
And so he then he corners the jury by misinstructing them at the end and put them in a place where they had no choice but to either rebel against him or to find us guilty. So we were found guilty based on the media's misrepresentation of the facts. There was inmates that wanted to kill me. So when I got thrown in jail, they put me in solitary confinement for 3 weeks. My wife was on house arrest. The reason why they put me in jail and not her is because I wouldn't shut up about the fact that there's a double standard here where it's like, wait a minute, we've got a case of criminal negligence resulting in death, which is up to 25 years in jail. It's a much greater charge, yet you're holding nobody responsible for that in the same case, but yet you're coming after us as parents and holding us to a higher standard of care than a doctor. Like, no doctor's getting charged if they misdiagnose.
Yeah.
And yet, if we misdiagnose, if we don't realize what's going on with our son, we get to go to jail.
Yeah.
Right? Makes no sense.
No sense.
And so I'm continually speaking out. So the judge throws me in jail over the matter rather than putting me on house arrest like my wife. So what happens is we end up in the appeal court, and I'm jumping forward here. I'll jump forward to 2019 in a second here to illustrate the case in point about the role the doctors were playing and the intent behind all of this. That this isn't just a mistake. That this is fully intentional to set a precedent in Canada and remove parental rights and medical choice rights in Canada.
Right.
But what happened is we get out of jail on bail because we're appealing, and the appeal in the Alberta courts doesn't go through. They highlight their incompetence or corruption. I like to think it was more corruption than anything, but it was a 2-1 decision against us, a panel of 3 judges that had to decide on it. The one judge verbalized that based on the error in law that the judge made, that the jury had no choice but to find us guilty. So he's the one that identified it, being a legal expert on the matter. Those aren't my words; those are his. And so then we end up going to the Supreme Court of Canada, where they highlight the incompetence or corruption of the Alberta Appeal Court, which is the highest court in Alberta, wherein 7 Supreme Court justices unanimously say this is wrong. And they undo the conviction. They send us back out into the public as if nothing ever happened, but a retrial is issued. That if the Crown so wants, they can issue a retrial. And sure enough, they took the bait on it and they went with it, even though by this point in time, we were already exposing so much of the perjury and corruption that had taken place with their star witnesses. So here we get into a trial in June 2019, after we had battled in and out of the courts for a long time about, give us our evidence, give us all of the medical evidence. We have evidence that it exists or existed. Give it to us now. You can't proceed with the trial unless you receive full disclosure. It's illegal. This trial will never happen. Well, we got the second top judge in Alberta, who's internationally known for attacking free men, Justice Rook. The Meads versus Mead decision, which is his famous decision. He came on our case and he kiboshed us on declaring that there was withheld evidence. He was yelling, screaming at us. He was irate. He was trying to do everything he could to get me to shut up. And eventually it just came to the point where I just laughed, where it's like, wow, okay, here we go again. You're going to yell at me again. Okay, well, you're not intimidating me anymore. At first you did, but you just made me stronger because of it. Because I don't care. What can I do now? You're going to throw me in jail? Right. I've already been there, right? Come on. What are you going to do? Free food? Well, yeah, it's not the best food, but come on, really?
Yeah.
Like, some people pay money to go to a silent retreat.
Right. Right.
Yeah, sure. I guess I had to pay a little bit more because my trial up to that point cost well over $500,000.
God.
So that cost me that much to get me to a solitary confinement where it was a silent retreat, but still.
Right.
So at that point, I'm not fearing anymore.
Good.
And so he would just sit there and try his intimidation tactics, and I would just sit there and then I would just rebut calmly, and then he'd get more mad, and I'd be like, I got evidence that there's evidence. Where is it? Give us the evidence. We want to know what happened, right? How can we defend ourselves? This is absolutely necessary. And so anyways, we get into trial in 2019, even after the withheld evidence. And what was of interest is that the Crown this time didn't call all of their medical experts. They only called the doctors. Actually, it was only one particular doctor out of the Alberta Children's Hospital who had the very least to do with Ezekiel. Only had a few hours out of 5 days, only a few hours of treatment time with Ezekiel. They called her because she was the one that was willing to lie the most. And it could have been out of ignorance, because she might have actually truly believed that it was bacterial meningitis, even though her other colleagues were saying, well, yeah, the CT scan didn't really show bacterial meningitis, so we can't validate that. And the reason being is because they had touch points after that seeking for an answer, and they didn't know whether or not we had the evidence showing that they had already disregarded bacterial meningitis as a cause of death because it wasn't there. And so they only called a handful of the biggest liars that time around, rather than the whole broad spectrum of doctors that they did in the first trial. And so those who were willing to lie the most were the ones that were brought on, which to me says they have an absolute agenda of creating a certain narrative to try to bring us down as parents and to try to set a precedent in law that scares the heck out of all natural-minded parents out there, so that they start using allopathic medicine over homeopathic or naturopathic or Ayurvedic or Chinese medicine or whatever they decide they want to use.
And it's not just that, that they want to serve the interests of big pharma, in my opinion, because it's also that they have these, they'll say it outright, like, oh, women who breastfeed tend not to, women who breastfeed, their antibodies that they're giving their babies will actually undo the vaccines that we're giving them. So we need to get women to not breastfeed so that we can give their kids vaccines. And I'm like, okay, wow. And then, this idea that parents who are raising kids in this way, that have an eye towards natural health and natural healing and possibly not vaccinating and possibly homeschooling and all these things tend to go together. And those kids end up being actually educated, thoughtful, emotionally present beings that don't just go along with these horrifying things that we're doing in society. And so we need to stop that from happening because we can't deal with that. As well as all of this that's very clear, like you were saying, where they're trying to get martial law easily put in place. Well, why would you do that unless you have a plan at some point to have people who are going to resist what you want to be doing, and you can take all the rights away in what you think is a legal manner,
Yep.
and all the other things that go along with it. So it just clearly, all of it points to that same agenda of total control of people's lives, and where you cannot make choices for yourself or for your family or for your children, period, in any way, shape, or form. But I'm curious to jump back to you being in jail. Why were there people in there who wanted to kill you? Why did you have to go into solitary confinement?
So I really wanted to experience the full jail experience.
Yeah.
Right? I wanted to see what was all there out of curiosity, in a sense, right? When I found out I'm going to jail, I might as well make the most of it.
Right.
So I was really looking forward to going into the general public, and maybe even being a help to people in there or whatever, right? Being encouraging or whatever.
Yeah.
So when I got into jail initially, the guard said, here, you have to check off one of these boxes. You can either go in protective custody or you can go in general public. I'm like, oh, of course I'm going to go general public. All naive, right? I don't know the culture in jail. And he's like, even if you check that box off, we're not going to put you in general public, by the way. And I'm like, well, why not? He says, well, with high profile cases like this, we can't put you in general public. And so what I found out after is the inmates watch a lot of TV, and a lot of it's news, right? They want to find out what's going on in the outside world. And so when you have all of the mainstream news articles basically painting a picture of me being a baby killer, that's problem number one, because there is a sense of justice within the jail system, right?
Yeah.
Rapists, child molesters, baby killers. Yeah. Well, they get taken care of in jail. Now, to make it even worse, at the end, when I wouldn't shut up and I kept on speaking out, the way the judge deemed it was that I was unremorseful. Now, that's a real problem. An unremorseful baby killer, we definitely need to take care of this individual. So they put me in solitary confinement for my protection. And at first I thought, come on, like, it can't be that bad, really. Like, and I know how to navigate my way through. I've been a salesman for many years. I'm able to negotiate and all that type of stuff. I can get through this process, right? Well, what I found out was that probably wouldn't have been the case at all in jail. About a week after I got in, an inmate got out who was indirect, like I believe it was his mother or his aunt knew my family. And what was communicated to my father was through this inmate, through the individual that my father knew, is that they were actually laying plans for me. They were expecting me to show up, and that they already had plans in place to take care of me, which is basically a pillow over the face so that nobody can hear you scream while about 4 or 5 of them jump you and literally just massacre you within seconds. And then everybody scatters and nobody can be held accountable. And basically you're black and blue if you're still, able to be cognizant or alive, right? Wow. They just literally, they'll just sack you so fast. So, so I'm glad that I didn't end up in that situation, naively thinking that I could have done some good there. Yeah. So solitary confinement is where they had to put me, but now it's been deemed unconstitutional in Canada to have somebody in solitary confinement over 15 days. And I was there for 21 days.
So you would have been put out for 6 days and you would have been murdered in those 6 days.
Quite possible.
Isn't that so interesting? Because I would have been like behind that. Like, yeah, you don't want to keep people in solitary that long. Like, that's torture and that's not right. It's inhumane. But now I'm like, wait a second. There's times where you definitely want to keep people in there that long because, there was no way they could keep you in non-solitary confinement but separate from everyone, or I guess.
Well, exactly. There has to be some kind of reform there because, being locked in a cell without, for 21 days, getting out for an hour to up to 2 hours per day to make a phone call, to have a shower, to clean your cell, whatever. But the rest of the time, you're literally just stuck in your cell, for 22, 23 hours a day. Lights never going out enough that you can literally read 24 hours a day if you wanted. So you're in a light situation, nothing to cover your face with. And not seeing the sun for the entirety of that time, that's inhumane. It really is. And it did have a devastating effect on my health, even for that 21 days. My hair thinned out and became brittle, which I had a great hair before, and I'm not here to brag about it, but nutrition does that. Mm-hmm. My eyes when I got out of jail, my eyes were yellowed. The whites were now yellow. So I was starting to go a little jaundice. Probably, due to sun deprivation as well as the diet itself. It was not ideal. And so, it can be devastating. Even within 21 days, there was a massive shift already that took place. So, it is inhumane, and they need to have some kind of reform to allow for people, especially innocent people that have been wrongfully convicted, right, to have some sense of freedom.
Right. Yeah. And even some of the darkest criminals, I would say, like, we're not going to see any improvement in them if this is all that we provide them with. And, we could have a whole show, I'm sure, where we debate about how to best try to help some people who might be able to reform, but that's its own subject. But so where are we at now with all of this? Because it's not over yet, right? You're free at the moment, which is awesome. And you're obviously still in good spirits and doing good work, which is amazing. And thank you for that. But what's happening now?
Well, 2019 was an interesting year. So I had to self-represent myself because at this point in time, we're broke as a family. We can't afford legal representation anymore. And so I'm representing myself. My wife has 3 lawyers that'll fill in as time dictates, because and none of them are prepared. They were just 3 lawyers that felt sorry for her. And so obviously nobody can clear their schedule to come to a trial with a few days notice. So they would kind of alternate, and they'd watch me cross-examine, and they'd get brought up to speed on the case, and then they would finish up the cross-examination, and they were all charging half rate. So that's what we were able to afford for my wife.
Yeah.
And so 2019 was an interesting trial. It spanned over 3.5 months. And the reason for that was their star witness, the medical examiner, Dr. Bamidele Adiagbo. And I shouldn't even refer to him as a doctor, and I'll get into why that is, because that's actually under question right now, legitimately under question. But in relation to him, he was extremely dodgy. So initially we had 3 days planned for him, and he wouldn't schedule, so he scheduled in. And then when things got heated and we started to expose him on the stand, and just blew all of his arguments to pieces, literally. And so here I am, this layperson, not educated in the medical system at all. And I'm absolutely just exposing his lies and corruption that he'd normally get away with. He started becoming dodgy. And so after day 2, he said, "I'm not available tomorrow." And everybody's shocked. The judge is shocked, because we were expecting him tomorrow. The Crown's shocked. They're also on the phone. And so he makes it so he's not available. But he's like, a week and a half or 2 weeks later, he's like, "Okay, I'm available again." So he comes back on. So now we're having to do a bunch of traveling, because we're living 10 hours away from where court is taking place at the time.
Oh my God.
And so then all of a sudden we have him over CCTV again. So it's because he's refusing to come up to Canada for the trial. We think he fled as soon as we exposed the corruption in 2018. All of a sudden he moved down to Indiana. Out of the jurisdiction of Canada, as soon as we started to expose the corruption. We did so online. And so now he's not willing to come into Canada for some reason. We're thinking, what the heck? And so anyways, he's making himself sporadically available, but it's really chewing up the court time, because now nothing's fresh on anybody's mind. We have to kind of review what we'd been over before. And so it's chewing up more time. So literally the cross-examination of him went over the period of 5 days total, but it took about a month and a half to 2 months total to cross-examine him.
Wow.
And so he absolutely held up the court process, threw a wrench in the way that the whole process went, because generally the Crown will go first, then the defense gets their opportunity. We had to go before he was even finished, which is problematic, because now the Crown can cross-examine him on stuff, or examine him on stuff that we brought up in our defense. So now there's an appealable issue right there, due to the Crown star witness being extremely dodgy.
Yeah.
So he eventually comes up to Canada, but he has undercover RCMP accompanying him at all times. Now, at the same time, there's another individual that's claiming that Dr. Adiagbo had falsified the autopsy report for his cousin. And he's exposing the corruption there, and he's finding out all this information. And so Adiagbo is getting extremely concerned about coming to Canada anymore. And so, like I said, he has personal bodyguards accompanying him everywhere that he goes. And so he obviously upset too many people. And there's a lot of people out there that are saying, you messed up the autopsy report, you're lying about this, whatever. It's not just an isolated incident with us. And so a good reason for him to leave the jurisdiction, because he's no longer a wanted, or he's a wanted individual by some people, but he's no longer welcome in a sense.
Yeah.
His word is welcome, and it's only time before it catches up with him. So we're found not guilty in mid-September of 2019.
Ooh.
And what happens is this lobbyist group, this individual, I don't think she's a doctor. She's a bioethicist out of the University of Calgary, Juliette Guichon. She's a legal expert. She's a journalist, I guess, because she authors articles for the Crown-owned media, Canada Broadcasting Corporation. And she's also, an expert in medicine of sorts. And so she's been on our case all along, trying to push this precedent. But of note, she's also been deemed the public, or she received the Public Health Hero Award of Canada back in, I believe it was 2012, for ramming the HPV vaccine down the Catholic school board's throat. The Catholic school board at the time wasn't willing to accept the vaccine for morality issues.
Yeah.
They figured it would promote infidelity. And Juliette Guichon made such a public stink about it that all 13 Catholic school boards accepted it. And as a result, she received the Public Health Hero Award of Canada for saving so many lives.
What a backward
So this
system.
is an industry, lack of better terms, this is an industry whore.
Yeah.
This is somebody who's for hire. And she's pushing fluoride right now in Calgary because they removed fluoride from the water source.
Oh, good
and so
for them.
now she's the one that speaks before city council there. So she's part of all the big industry issues, but she's always finding herself on the wrong side of the fence. So she incites this major battle against the judge for finding us not guilty and makes the accusation and has a platform to make the accusation through CBC. She makes the accusation that the judge was racist because this doctor or supposed doctor is Nigerian.
Oh my
And because
God.
the judge, yeah. So
It's
now we
like-
have the racist card being pulled, right?
It's seriously, everything always falls in line with their stupid agendas. And it's like, you can never criticize someone because of the color of their skin. Like that is actually racism. I don't know. Like, whatever. That's just ridiculous.
Right. And so here now this public pressure is being created and the Crown takes the bait and they appeal. And one of their appealable points was the criticism that the judge gave towards this expert witness for the fact that, one, he wasn't understandable, two, that he was arrogant, petulant. He would have his certain antics that he'd go about because he'd actually yell. It was amazing. It was actually really entertaining to see the conduct of this individual. He would flip his lid anytime that I exposed him.
Wow.
He would pause and then he'd be like, Mr. Stefani, and he'd freak out. Or at one point he said, Mr. Ezekiel, right? Which is the name of my son, right? But he's so out of control. And he's yelling. He's like, that, right? And he's just starting to explode. So the judge is calling him out on the antics. The fact that he's not professional, that he's not impartial, that clearly he has a bias, that he wouldn't answer just simple questions that would expose what he had done. And so now the judge is called a racist for it. So sure enough, the Crown appeals that, as well as the precedent that was established where the Crown now has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that medical attention would actually make a difference, which they don't like to do. Because before it was just assumed that it's just like water, it's like air. You know, if you deprive your child of either of those, you're failing to provide necessaries of life. Oh, sorry, did I lose you there?
No, just for a second. You're back.
I'm back with you?
Yeah.
Good. And so now the Crown actually has to prove that medical attention will make a difference, rather than it's just an assumed, that by the virtues of Western medicine, that it's necessary of life. And so they appeal those 2 points. One, judge is racist. Two, that the Crown has to prove in failing to provide necessaries of life that medical attention, Western medicine, would make a difference. So they appeal it. So here we're currently in the appeal, but now things are really starting to unravel. What happened back in earlier this year is there was evidence that surfaced that shows that Bamidele Adiagbo was state jumping from one state to the next before he got into Canada, because he kept on failing his tests as a licensed doctor. So he wasn't getting a license. Eventually, he ends up having to work under some other doctor's supervision because he couldn't pass the tests. And suddenly, he ends up in Canada somehow as a licensed forensic pathologist.
Who can't pass tests.
He can't pass a test. He can't pass the English test, and he can't pass the medical tests. So this brings into question his expert witness criteria. Like for him to be qualified as an expert witness, it all goes out the window. And what it appears to be, there's more evidence surfacing, and I can't really comment too deep on it at this point. But what it appears to be, the possibility is that he might be involved, possibly, in credential fraud. That he might have never actually been a licensed doctor out of Nigeria.
Oh my God.
And so which makes a lot of sense, especially when you look at the transcript where I'm having to educate him on simple things like how much blood per kilogram of body weight would an infant have, which is 70 to 80 milliliters. His guess was more around 10 to 30, which is a huge issue because anytime you're looking at the potential of medication overdose or saline overdose, which is another element that came up with Ezekiel's passing, they did overdose him on saline, which creates osmotic demyelination syndrome within the pons area of the brainstem, where literally the neurons just shred because of the osmotic difference in sodium. So you have a major dump of intracellular fluid to extracellular fluid. So you have shrinkage of those cells, and it literally just ravages those neurons, causing brain damage, irreparable brain damage. So these are important things to know to be able to identify how somebody died. And he didn't even know, like he was way off, not just a little bit off, but way off on even just the volume of blood that would be found within an infant. And so I had to educate him on that. So now it makes sense. If he is actually involved in credential fraud, it makes sense as to why. When you have a lay person educating a supposed expert witness on the stand, you got some issues, right?
You're going to explode.
So this comes out, and shortly after that, he goes, and we don't know exactly what the story is, but the article just came out this morning on CBC National News.
I'm going to show it on the screen while you're talking about it so people can see it.
Perfect.
You won't be able to see it. Sorry, but they will.
That's okay. Bamidele Adiagbo goes and gets drunk. Shortly after, all this starts to surface, and he's made aware of it because he's under investigation right now in the States for these issues right now. He goes and gets drunk. He drives his Mercedes, and he ends up smashing into a woman from behind in another car, and does severely injures her, and gets busted for drunk driving. And now he's facing up to 1 to 5 years jail time for that particular act. But that's just the tip of the iceberg, metaphorically speaking, because the real issue at hand is if he gets busted for credential fraud, 1 to 5 years jail time is a drop in the bucket. So he is possibly liable for a lot of jail time, and it will create a major issue. Now, a major issue with every autopsy that ever took place in Canada that resulted in a conviction that he had his fingerprints on. So here's the issue that I have. I know I've seen how deep this corruption goes. There's going to be an effort to protect him at all levels because of how tremendous the fallout would be if it's actually proven that he is involved in credential fraud. The evidence suggests that he actually has. I've looked at the evidence, and it actually suggests, just from a layman's perspective, that that's actually what's going on, that he has a false set of credentials from Nigeria, and then came over to the US and kept on failing all of the medical tests, and then somehow ends up in Canada, where he's now having people convicted for crimes that they never committed against deceased people. And so the fallout would be so huge, the lawsuits would be so huge against the state for allowing a fraud like that in, that I'm not fully trusting that they're going to do the right thing. But I sure hope they do, because if they do, it will expose so much corruption that's been so prevalent within the medical examiner's office in Calgary for so many years. And there's other medical examiners too that have been busted for falsifying autopsy reports dating back just over a decade, where they've already had to basically create major reform in the medical examiner's office. It just turns out that it's corrupt to the core. So anything you add to it just continues to output corruption.
God, it's just such a mess. I mean, there's like every point along the way, there's so much corruption and so much evil and so many people pushing for the exact opposite of truth and justice that it's just really overwhelming. But there are all these moments of hope along it too, and these moments of intuition, and these moments of people who actually did, do something of the right thing, at least that helps along the way, and that makes it pretty hopeful as well. But if they're appealing on those two, points, and one of the points is that you have to, or that this medical intervention would have been life-saving, can't you also point back to the fact that they didn't even have the right equipment to have been life-saving in the very, very first case, the very first moment itself? Or is
No,
that
that
just
becomes a
not?
civil action, unfortunately.
Okay.
It should be an element of the criminality where you can
Yeah.
highlight a double standard within the court proceedings. But unfortunately, you can't do that. That's not allowed. They isolate. Let's say you have 3 people that are involved in a criminal act and only one gets charged. You can't bring the other individuals into that for some reason, which is it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
You'd have to bring that in as the defense, and we're now countering that. Then goes into through civil proceedings, but those civil proceedings are also dependent on the outcome of the criminal proceedings. Hence, why there's been such an opposition to us being found not guilty, because it puts them on the line for likely millions of dollars for malicious prosecution, wrongful death, covering up of evidence, all that type of stuff, conspiracy. And
Wrongful
so they're
jailing.
fighting tooth and nail.
Yeah. Well, and it says, I notice in this article by like you say, the Crown-owned media, CBC, it says, could this affect Calgary cases? One legal expert says, although, what's his name? Adiagbo's charges could become relevant next time, blah, blah, blah. They go into how none of this will matter, and so everyone should just, let it go and ignore it. And so clearly the media, like everyone else, is colluding, with the desired outcome.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Like just priming people. Don't worry about this. Everything's fine.
Yeah, nothing to see here. That's an isolated incident. His credibility isn't under question. It'll be interesting to see how it goes down. I mean, really, so we're 8 years into this battle with them over the death of my son. And I don't think it's going to end anytime soon. I think it's just going to continue on. But every time that they come forward against us, they get exposed more and more and more, and we have more of a following. We have more support. More people are awakening to the level of corruption. We've had a lot of people reach out to us and say, wow, I had no idea about the level of corruption here in Canada. People that were just asleep, but they saw our case. They saw, they see that the photographs of my wife and I with our kids, and they you can read between the lines. You can see that that the media is not being forthcoming at all. Yeah. And so people are saying, wait a minute, something's wrong here. Or, people that know us or know people that know us and vouch for us. So it's served to awaken thousands of people at this point in time. And so it's only damaging themselves more and more. They're digging a deeper hole all along. So, in a sense, I almost welcome it, where it's like, it would be nice just to let us alone. It's cost our family over $1 million up to this point. I haven't done an accounting recently, but it's easily well over $1.2 million. And it's left us kind of broke in a sense where, we're now rebuilding. We're almost out of legal debt. We still have about $35,000 in unpaid legal bills. But, that's small time for how big of a trial we've had all along. Yeah. And so it'd be nice for them to just leave us alone. But in the other sense, it's doing so much good. It's awakening so many people, and they're doing it to themselves.
Yeah. Well, and just your ability to talk about it and share it even is, like you said, it's reaching all these other people and waking people up more and more. And then your attitude about it is perfect. Even when you're describing like, okay, I'll go into jail and I'll do some good there then, if I can't stop that from happening, I'm going to turn it to my advantage. And, that energy that you're bringing to it, I think is exactly what they don't expect. And, I kind of talk about this sometimes with people where, we feel like we're just so overwhelmed by this system and how evil it is and how dark it is and how could you ever undo it or work against it or whatever. And it's exactly that, of having this really strong connection to yourself and your spirit to where you're able to keep that energy, calm and confident in the face of whatever happens. And they just don't count on it. They have so much hubris that they just believe, like we talked about earlier, that their plan is bulletproof and it's going to happen like this. And we've got it all. And we have every single aspect like ready to go. And they don't expect these things. And so it's really refreshing to see your attitude about it and the energy that you have about it, especially in the face of all that you've lost, and it's really amazing. You're an incredible person.
I don't know about that. Thank you. I appreciate it. I'll try to accept the compliment. Yeah. But, it's an interesting learning lesson. You mentioned all that I've lost. One of the realizations I've had is that as weird as it seems, in order to truly see life for what it is, we have to experience death.
Yeah.
Right? There has to be the polar opposites, right? Um, for us, in order to enjoy the sweet, we have to experience the bitter, right? And so, yeah, I have lost a lot, but through it all, I've also gained so much. And yeah, I don't have my 10-year-old son with me. He'd be 10 years old now, right? I don't have him with me. And it leaves a hole in the family. We've got a 12-year-old son, and then we've got an 8-year-old son, and we've got that gap in between, and then we've got a 6-year-old son, and then a 3-year-old girl, just about 3. She'll be 3 next month. But so there's always that gaping hole, and nothing I can do can bring that back. But through all of it, I wouldn't wish these experiences on anybody, but what we've gotten out of the experiences, the growth, the opportunities of growth through these intense experiences, these trials, I would wish that upon everybody, right? It's been refining in a sense, in the good times, and obviously sometimes you kind of give yourself over to a little bit of bitterness. We all have our days,
Right?
But for the most part, it's just been really provided opportunities of growth as we've gone through intense opposition.
That's a pretty amazingly beautiful thing. And I really love that message that you can bring to people because of that. It's absolutely true. And, I think that this is another idea that I have and that a lot of people have about death. Like you were just saying, that you don't really know what life is unless you understand that death is the intrinsic part of it. Like we are all going to die and everything that we've ever seen or touched or hugged, anybody we've ever hugged or loved, like they're all going to die too. And so as much as it's sort of like trite to say it, it's like oft repeated, but it really does make you appreciate what you have in this time that you do have here. And it also it puts it into perspective, like what are you going to do with it, and what is it worth? And, if you were facing something like this, I think that it gives you almost more power and strength in it, because you're like, well, I am going to die someday anyway. And this is, I guess, the place where I've, got to show what I have to live for and what I can do while I'm here. And I think it reminds you that you're like, that you are the spiritual being, and that part lives on. If you chose to turn away from this and just let them sort of win and have it, like, could you live with that very well? And how would it affect your soul? And those are the things I think that are lasting, and it really reminds us of all of those truths.
Absolutely. In fact, that brings to mind one point where I had that exact conflict of making a decision as to whether or not I could live with it for the rest of my life, taking the easy way out. In early into 2016, right before the trial began, the Crown laid out an offer for us for me to plead guilty. My wife would go scot-free, and they would pay for her counseling, and all they would give me was 18 months probation. That was it.
Wow.
And when I weighed it out,
wow.
I saw what was coming in the months following, and how expensive a trial would be, and that it would be, just for the trial alone, it would be, well over $100,000, if not $200,000 easy. And so we actually had to make a decision on that and consider it. And at the end of the day, it was something I couldn't live with. I couldn't plead guilty and take the easy way out on something that I didn't do, that they are accusing me of.
And that would give them the easy out as well, and not taking responsibility for anything that they've done.
Exactly. And so, it's one of those things I look back and I'm so grateful that I didn't make that decision. It would have been a lot easier, but I would probably still have huge regrets, and none of this would have been exposed. We would have never known why our son passed away and what led up to it. And when we look at all the medical evidence, what we discover is the low-lying symptoms that he had in the days previous was low sodium. And we had no idea. And so now we're educated as parents to understand the symptoms of low sodium. Yeah. And then when that corrected by giving him the electrolytes, and that's why he was getting better on the next day after we started giving him electrolytes. That's why he went symptom free. But then we don't understand how the potassium spiked, which then shut him down. But that gave us closure to understand what actually took place. Whereas we were always left with these questions of how did he die? Because that was the most, atypical type of bacterial meningitis ever, because he wasn't showing pain or anything. Like, it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah. So, to understand that and have that closure is super important. And they were trying to hide that from you as well. And That's criminal.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I'm really proud of you for making that choice. And it's like my father always said this too. Like you can pretty much tell if you're doing the right or the wrong thing, because if you're doing the easy thing, it's like probably the wrong thing. Like the right thing is often like pretty hard, but hard doesn't equal bad, or you know what I mean? Like difficult, like any growth that we can get out of life is going to be kind of hard won in some way. And you know, there's like a balance there. Where like not literally everything should be so hard all the time, but there is just that you can kind of know. And this is exactly the temptation that I think, you know, darkness, evil, like whatever you want to call this force kind of offers us every once in a while. It's like, okay, well here, I'll make this deal with you. Like you can have this easy way out and we'll just like call this all good. But it's like you said, like, can you live with it? And is it going to sit with your soul well? And yeah, I'm glad you had that conversation with yourself and chose that. It's a really good message also to bring to this. And I guess what's like the most difficult aspect of everything that you've had to face?
Oh, the most difficult aspect. I don't know. It's all been pretty difficult because, you know, going back to your initial question that brought us into the court case about me presenting, you know, my career, all that type of stuff. Like I was a sought after individual from the various health shows across Canada, where they would put me up as a keynote speaker in many instances, showcase me on their websites, that type of thing. And whereas basically acting as an attraction to bring people into these health shows.
Yeah.
And, you know, that felt really good. You know, you feel a sense of accomplishment and you're blessing people's lives. You're empowering them with knowledge.
Right.
And they're able to radically transform their lives with the knowledge you're giving them.
Yeah.
And so, you know, there were so many elements to that just kind of, you know, make you feel good. And then what happened is the media started following me, stalking me. So when they knew I was going to be presenting somewhere, they would put on an article basically saying this health show is supporting this baby killer. They wouldn't say it in those words, but that was the message that was being conveyed.
Right.
And it started to create major disruption where health shows were being shut down or where they were having to kick me out. It was extremely damaging to the whole natural health industry as a whole.
Yeah.
And so I went from at one point being a sought after presenter to having no venue at all that could carry me because they knew what the effect was going to be. As soon as anybody advertised for it, the media would put out an article and the thing would be shut down. And so that was hard in a sense, but you know, by that point in time, I guess I'd already been through enough that I learned to be dynamic that I actually, you know, at first there's a shock value to it when I realized what was going on. And then I just kind of laughed about it and said, okay, well, how do we get this message out in a different way?
Yeah.
Right. So I don't know what the hardest thing was. You know, realistically, the hardest thing was losing my son.
Right.
Clearly, I mean, nothing I can do will bring him back. And you realize that. And you have those regrets as a parent that, you know, I wish I would have seen this. I wish, you know, if only I would have done this. What if I would have done this? And, you know, like there's so many factors to it that, you know, he could still be here today, right? What if we would have just drove past the ambulance even rather than taking him to the ambulance and drove 4 more minutes at the speed that we were going and brought him right to the hospital where they had the equipment, right? Would he still be alive today? Most likely. And so we live with those things. And, or what if we would have, you know, how did he get the spiked potassium? What if we would have done something differently? What if we would have been giving him electrolytes all along? He would have never had that issue or whatever, right? So you have all those would have, could have, should haves in relation to him. And so that's clearly the hardest part, but it's all just been a continuation from that, where there's been more loss, like you say, and eventually it just gets to the point where you realize there's nothing that they can take from you that would actually impact your happiness, your joy, your peace. Eventually it can get to the point where, you know, they shackle you up and it has no effect because your peace, your joy is not dependent on what your physical circumstances are at all.
Absolutely. And what a beautiful lesson or understanding, you know, to get from anything, but especially this huge mess. So is that, do you think the best thing that came out of it is that sort of understanding and experience, or is there something even better?
For me, yeah, it would be the refining process that's taking place. I mean, I'm still a work in progress, and I've got a long ways to go. And you know, in many instances, I'm still you know, a failure in so many instances, in a sense, right? Not that I bash on myself, but you know, there's so many things that I fall short on, I guess. And so, you know, I've got a lot of improvement to do as an individual, but where it's taken me thus far, it has been a beautiful thing, because it's also allowed me to serve in capacities that there's no way I could have served before, where I can be more compassionate to other individuals, where I can empathize with them in their struggles, and actually be an example, I guess, of what you can rely on to continue to provide a sense of fortitude through the whole process, where you can still stand tall and confident and strong, even in the midst of incredible adversity, persecution, death threats, whatever, right? Where it doesn't affect you. So, it's just allowed me to be able to serve in a greater capacity, and that's ultimately what's the most rewarding thing that we can do in life, is when we serve those around us.
Yes, and what a great, perfect thing to keep you moving forward in this. That realization and that experience and that abilities enhancement. It's pretty cool. And so in that, in serving other people and being there for other people and connecting with other people, what about people who are listening who might want to do all kinds of things at this point? They might want to come support you. Is there a legal fund that people can donate to, or some way that they can support you in that way? Is there a group that they can join to keep up to date? Where can they find these amazing products that you still have available, which is also amazing throughout all of this, and anything else that you want to offer people? Because I know a lot of people are going to want to seek you out in some way and support you in some way.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So, okay, going to the products, truehopecanada.com. You can find the various locations that sell the products. It's available in the vast majority of health food stores across Western Canada, and we're getting situated quite well out in Eastern Canada now. And so Empower Plus is the main one, True Hope Empower Plus. That's the flagship product that put us on the map, but we do have other products like the nascent iodine that, I'd recommend for Hashimoto's, along with selenium and all that. And so that's where you can find the products in Canada. In the US, truehope.com. You can find our products there with all the research as well. There's now 34 medical journal publications on the Empower Plus product.
Wow.
Which just sets at defiance the efficacy of the pharmaceuticals versus natural medicine. So just cool. Completely just blows them out of the water. All independent studies, all that. In relation to finding me, so you can find me on Facebook. Just look up my name. I'm pretty recognizable when you find my profile picture. David Stephan, that's Stephan. And there is a website that I don't really have that active right now, but it does have a link to a donation page, and that's stand and then number 4. So stand for truth.ca. And so you'll see one of my most recent articles on there, where the Canadian Medical Association in their journal actually tries to rally their 75,000 subscribers, which are mainly medical professionals, to generate public pressure for an appeal. So even the Canadian Medical Association got behind this whole situation, and they're banking on my conviction so that they have a precedent to monopolize Western medicine.
I can't imagine what it takes for a person to want to do that to someone else and not look into all of the facts and not balance them all and, be rational in your approach to it. That's what you're supposed to be as a doctor, is rational, but
the love of money has clouded our judgment. The love of money has clouded our judgment, where we no longer see people as people, but rather as objects. And that's exactly what's taking place. Is greed is really what's pushing this, where people are engaging in inhumane acts just for the sake of substantiating their jobs, their industry, whatever it may be.
Right. And it's exactly like you said earlier, that there's this top sort of tier of elite, evil, whatever, psychopaths who are sort of engineering this all. But there's this whole level of people who are sort of complicit, useful assholes, who are just, like you said, they're greedy, or they're too scared to do anything else, or whatever it is that makes them sort of comply and go along with it. But it takes all of that to keep it going. And it takes someone like you and people like us, doing what we do to try and bring it to an end, or at least give a little bit of hope towards getting people through until it ends. So that's good. And I'm glad that people can connect with you and support you. And I hope that everyone out there realizes that every time we connect and support and find these products and, use them for ourselves, like all of this sort of ripples out and has an effect. So we can all be a part of that in that way. And I think that that's a beautiful thing too. And I like to close things down by asking you if you have any sort of final thoughts that you want to share, like words of wisdom, or what you want to sort of leave people thinking about in relation to sort of everything, if you have something like that to share.
Well, you know, at the end of the day, the greatest thing that we can do as individuals is learn to love. Learn to truly love, because it's in that we actually see things for what they truly are. Um, we see God's creation for what it truly is, and we learn to respect it. We see each other as equals. We see each other as God sees us. And so, if we can truly learn to love one another, we wouldn't have any of these issues before us. We wouldn't have the corruption. We wouldn't have the exploitation of other humans. We wouldn't have the child trafficking. We wouldn't have any of this type of stuff going on. It all comes down to love. And love truly is, when we learn to tap into it, it's the greatest force that we can move forward with. You know, many of us will resort to anger initially when we see injustice. But the problem is with that, if we act in it, we become a part of the problem. And not only do we become a part of the problem, but it will burn us out, right? So we actually become part of the collateral damage of the whole situation. Whereas if we act out of love, if we see injustice and love propels us to take a stand, that force, you can't burn out in that. You cannot burn out. And I've watched so many activists burn out over the years that I've been surrounded with. And it's because they move forward with a sense of anger and resentment towards it. But really what's propelling that is an underlying fear.
Yeah.
And so we need to be able to tap into that love that literally, and I've experienced this where, yeah, I've had jail time hanging over my head, my family being ripped apart, hanging over my head. But when I find myself in a state of love, there is no fear of that. Yeah, that's a potential reality, but there is no fear in it. And so you don't get bound up with this anxiety and stress. So learn to love, but learn where love comes from as well. And that God is love, truly. And that if we want to tap into that, we have to tap into God. And that, yeah. And so that's probably the greatest message that I could probably convey, having experienced it myself. On a daily basis, renew that love, tap back into it, and let that be your guiding force day by day, because it makes all the difference in the world.
What a beautiful message. It's infinite, and then there is no fear in it. I love it. So fellow travelers of the path, it is a beautiful thing. This has been your analog, electric, concentric dose of wisdom, according to David Stephan. David, thank you so much for coming here tonight, for everything that you do, and for all that you bring to all of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. Sure appreciate you having me on. Blessings to you.
You too. All the machinations work to wear us down and keep us entrapped within a system of death. There is nothing there for us but loss and entropy. We are beings of extropy, however, and have been convinced to let go of our rightful place in the universe. You generate more energy than it enters your system, and you create novelty everywhere you tread, when you choose to live freely and fully. At some point, we have to let go and move on from this culture and system of death and live in the moment as beings and actors of infinite life and infinite love. And until you move fully within your infinite power, trailing embers to light the way for anyone who has eyes to see, travel well, aim for balance, and always look inside first.
Yeah, come on, Rat Kings, it's the rap machine, yeah, check it, gray bearded pirate, my motherfucker unknown, yeah, come on, in the place with my fist up, meaning I resist the bullshit that they feed us and lead us. This is just a part of the process, man, just watch this, cause this shit's about to get crazy like a mosh pit. We lost it, toss it, let's start it again, cause now with technology, with smarter men and women, this is the beginning, not the end. If this is the message of hope that I send, look on your TV, it's a culture of death. They'll keep on lying to the very last breath. We keep on striving and spreading the truth. It's hard to survive in this world for the youth. The door is closed, the old world is dead. Let's have an age of understanding instead. I'll include you and you include me. Let's see what we can build with some positivity. Let's go, you're moving too slow. Let me see your hands if you know what I know. Come on.
rap like mummy, ain't no dummy in my rhyming. Started flowing freestyling, now they rhyming loud silence. On with the violence, bodies piling with the gray bearded pirate. On your TV in 4K 3D virtual reality. Casualty of urban warfare. I know but I'm not scared, just prepared and aware. Shining my light through the tunnel of hope. Into the rope, but I'ma give it one more pull. Till the family is full. Take the bull by the horns and lead it to the slaughter. That would be harder and you would be softer. Sometimes I'm a monster and you forever imposter, which is champagne and lobster. This royalty, the way it was supposed to be. Hopefully the new door opens and the old one closes, with way more focus and growth to mold us, and the truth that they should have told us.
To them screens, it's a plot to drop the IQ. Fighting amongst each other over rulers that don't like you. Prefer us trapped in melancholy with the wood wands of holly. Suggestions that obliterate to camouflage the folly. Attempted mental robbery, executed sloppily. The paupers see this mockery and walk the talk with me. Put the hands up to touch the Akasha, cause you know deep down there's something bigger than your wallet. Everyone got a gift, everyone got a light. They want you to forget that ish, cause they can't dim the bright. The positive vibration takes you past the sign shackles, from the sewers and the alleys into moving castles. Who these assholes really serving with an exposed Achilles surgeon around the corner lurking to prove ascension trumps perversion? Learn them to catch fish and unplug the signal. Show them the simpletons now build the fucking temples.